The wind rolled off the Bitterroot Mountains, cold and biting for a late September morning in Montana. The river glided slow and glassy alongside the pine-lined trail, pretending it had nothing to hide. Scout wasn't buying it. Lieutenant Maddie Holt tugged her jacket tighter, her boots crunching over the frost-laced underbrush. The Belgian Malinois beside her, tethered by nothing but years of loyalty, froze mid-step. His ears stiffened. His nose twitched once. Then again. "Scout?" Maddie asked, slowing. The dog gave no warning. He bolted, launching into the trees toward the riverbank with a guttural bark that snapped the silence in half. "Scout!" Maddie ran after him, her heart racing, voice sharp in the morning stillness. She found him pawing furiously at a mass of tangled roots by the water's edge, snarling, not from aggression, but urgency. "Back! Let me see!" she shouted, kneeling fast. Scout stepped aside, tense and alert, his body coiled like a wire about to snap. Between the roots, half submerged in river mud, was a hiking backpack, military grade, faded olive green, caked with silt. Maddie hesitated just one breath, then unzipped it. Her stomach flipped. Inside, wrapped in a soaked, dirty thermal blanket, was a baby, no older than 2 weeks, skin bluish from the cold. Silent. For a second, Maddie thought the worst. Then came the gasp, a shallow, tiny inhale. A breath. She yanked off her jacket, swaddled the baby, shouted into her radio for medevac. Scout hovered close, trembling but still, his eyes locked on the bundle in her arms. The baby shivered once. Then again. Scout sat down. He didn't look at Maddie. He stared back at the river, as if it still held something, or someone. The ER at St. Vincent's Regional was a blur of latex gloves, heat lamps, and quick orders. Maddie stood just outside the glass, arms crossed, soaked to the knees. Her pulse hadn't slowed since the riverside. "He's stable," the pediatrician said, stepping out. "No hypothermia somehow. Lucky you found him when you did." "I didn't," Maddie replied. "Scout did." The doctor nodded slowly. "Still no ID? No sign of the mother?" "Nothing. No missing infant reports. No stolen birth certificates. We're running DNA now. Nothing makes sense. The baby had no identification, no microchip. The backpack didn't match any registry or military deployment in the past decade. Just a faint embroidered patch near the top. Property of SGTD Monroe. That name. It tickled something in Maddie's memory, but not clearly. Later, in the K9 truck, Maddie dried Scout's paws and fur with a towel, her hands shaking just a little more than they should. "You smelled him, didn't you?" she whispered. "Before I could even think straight. You knew." Scout blinked. Then he leaned his head into her chest. This wasn't a routine training exercise gone odd. This was something else. And Scout, somehow, had known the moment his paws touched the riverbank. Back at the precinct. Captain Leland paced in front of the incident board, eyebrows furrowed. A baby in a backpack, in a river, no signs of trauma, no reports, and no DNA hits in the system. "Nothing yet," Maddie said. He glanced at the field report. "You said the patch read D. Monroe. That ring any bells?" She hesitated. 6 years ago, there was a woman, Ava Monroe. She claimed her newborn was stolen from St. Vincent's. Whole town thought she'd lost her mind. No evidence. The kid was declared stillborn. And she? Inpatient facility. Pine Bridge Recovery Center just outside Lolo. Leland frowned. "You think this baby could be the same one?" Scout, lying quietly by the desk, lifted his head. "I don't know," Maddie said slowly. "But Scout hasn't let it go. He keeps sniffing the baby blanket. Not like he's curious, like he's remembering." Leland leaned back. "Get the DNA reprocessed. order a match against Monroe's old file if it's still archived. And if it is her kid? Leland exhaled through his nose. Then someone falsified a death certificate. Which means someone high up wanted that baby gone. At 3:42 a.m., the lab technician called Maddie directly. She listened, still half asleep in the truck with Scout curled beside her. Then she sat up straight. Full match. Maternal lineage confirmed. The baby in the backpack was not just alive. He was the biological son of Ava Monroe, legally declared dead 6 years ago. Scout stirred, sensing her tension. He nudged her arm with his nose. "We found him," she whispered. "But that river tried to keep him." "And someone helped it." Scout's eyes didn't leave hers. He already knew. And somewhere, the lie that buried that baby 6 years ago was beginning to crack. The nursery room at St. Vincent's was quiet, save for the rhythmic beeping of machines and the soft rustle of flannel blankets. Warm light filtered through the frosted windows, giving the space an illusion of peace. But Maddie Holt knew peace was a lie here. She stood in the observation bay, arms folded, eyes locked on the tiny figure inside the incubator. The baby, no name, no ID, was breathing steadily now. A feeding tube was taped delicately to his cheek. His fists clenched and relaxed in a newborn rhythm that reminded Maddie more of instinct than innocence. He had survived nearly freezing in a river, zipped inside a military backpack. That alone defied medical logic. "What do you mean there's no match?" she asked the nurse beside her. "Ran the facial, fingerprints, national birth registry." "Nothing," the woman replied, holding a tablet that showed one blank screen after another. "No Amber Alerts, no parental claims. It's like he doesn't exist." "That's impossible." "I thought the same thing." Maddie stared through the glass again. The infant flinched in his sleep, as if reacting to something invisible. Her fingers gripped her holster strap. Behind her, Scout let out a low growl, not aggressive, but deliberate. Paced once near the far wall, then approached the sealed laundry hamper near the door. Maddie watched silently as he circled it, nose twitching, tail stiff. Then, without hesitation, he placed a paw on the lid and whined. The nurse frowned. "What's he doing?" "Scout doesn't false alert," Maddie said, already pulling gloves on. Inside the hamper was a stack of soiled blankets. The one on top had been used to wrap the baby when he first arrived. Scout nosed closer. Then something changed. He froze. Maddie saw it in his eyes, recognition. Not curiosity. Memory. She gently pulled the blanket free and held it up. It looked ordinary. Hand-stitched border, soft cotton, faded cartoon moons. But Scout stepped back, ears twitching, and let out a low, sharp bark. The same bark he gave before he found the backpack. Maddie stared at him. "You know that scent, don't you?" Scout looked back at her, then at the baby through the glass. He did know it. Deep in that war-born, street-trained brain, there was a memory tied to that scent. Something from years ago. The dog wasn't just reacting. He was remembering. At her desk, Maddie pulled the blanket closer, searching for any tags or identifiers. There was one, nearly washed out. St. Vincent's Maternity Ward, 2017. Her blood ran cold. She flipped through digital archives, pulling up old hospital logs from that year. One entry caught her eye. Infant, male. Mother, Ava Monroe. Status, deceased. Time of death, 3:11 a.m. Cause, complications during delivery. Body, released to county. But there was no funeral record, no cremation request, no next of kin signature. Maddie's fingers hovered over her keyboard. Something's not right. She opened Ava Monroe's medical file. Diagnosis, postpartum psychosis, immediate transfer to Pine Bridge Recovery, 72 hours after losing her child. There was no autopsy attached, just a signed form by an attending physician. Except the signature wasn't from a doctor. It was from a shift supervisor, Colton Briggs. That name hadn't come up in years, but it carried weight. Briggs had been a rising star in the department before his sudden retirement. No one asked why. Some said burnout. Others whispered about misfiled evidence in a family case, but nothing stuck. Maddie's phone buzzed. It was Logan, a forensic analyst from DNA Services. She put him on speaker. "Got something weird for you," he said. "Define weird." "The baby's DNA. No hits in federal databases, but I ran a legacy query through archived maternal blood samples from hospital records. There's a match." Maddie leaned in. "To who?" "Ava Monroe." Silence. "That can't be." Maddie muttered. "It is. 100% maternal match. The kid you found isn't missing. He was never listed as born alive. As far as the system's concerned, he died 6 years ago. But he didn't. No, he didn't, which means someone falsified records. Badly." Scout shifted at Maddie's feet. The hair on his neck stood up. Back in the nursery, Maddie returned to the observation window. The baby stirred again, lips parting in a half-formed cry. A nurse stepped in beside her. "He's been agitated when we touch that blanket." Almost like he recognizes it. Instinct, maybe. Maddie nodded, barely hearing. Scout padded up next to her, eyes sharp. "You brought us something, didn't you?" She whispered, watching the baby. "You didn't just find him. You remembered him." She looked down at Scout, and he blinked slowly. This wasn't coincidence. This was a trail. And Scout, loyal, perceptive, relentless Scout, was leading her back to something that had been buried deep, but not deep enough. Maddie knew small towns could keep big secrets, but Grey Ridge, Montana, population 3,141, had a way of burying things deeper than most. Not with shovels, with silence. Scout trotted beside her as she walked through the old county archives building, his gait calm but deliberate, his eyes scanning shadows the way cops scan faces. The air smelled like mold and dusty regret. The place hadn't seen a budget increase in decades, but someone had kept the medical record sealed up just right. She spread out the files across a metal table and flipped through the folder labeled Monroe, Ava. The photographs from the hospital file were grainy, but Ava's eyes stood out. Wide. Wild. But not soulless. More like someone trying to scream while being told to stay silent. Her hair was pulled back tightly, as if order could make the pain vanish. She had just given birth when the photo was taken. The note attached was short. "Patient claims baby was stolen. No evidence of birth beyond initial delivery record. Diagnosis: postpartum psychosis. Transferred to Pine Bridge Recovery Center." Scout placed his paw on the folder. Maddie stopped flipping. "You don't trust it either, huh?" The dog didn't move. Something in her gut churned. She stared at the doctor's name. The original attending physician was listed as Dr. Samuel Lenley, but the signature on the psychiatric transfer order wasn't his. It was from Colton Briggs. Again. She closed the file slowly. 6 years ago, Ava Monroe gave birth to a son. The system recorded that child as stillborn. But Scout found him, alive, floating under a riverbank in a backpack wrapped in a blanket from St. Vincent's. There was no way Ava had been delusional. She'd been silenced. 20 miles outside Grey Ridge, the Pine Bridge Recovery Center sat nestled between pine-covered hills like a forgotten afterthought. It didn't look like a hospital. It looked like somewhere people went to disappear. Maddie checked in through 2 layers of security and followed the staff nurse through long beige corridors that smelled like bleach and resignation. Scout stayed in the truck, pacing at the window like he sensed this wasn't a place he wanted to be. The nurse stopped at a closed door. Ava's lucid these days, mostly. Some paranoia. Her records say delusions related to childbirth, but I don't know. She's never hurt anyone. Just sad. Can I ask her some questions? The nurse nodded. Just don't say the word baby too fast. It sets her off. Maddie pushed open the door. Ava Monroe sat by the window, her hands knitting something out of old yarn. Her hair was streaked with silver now. Her eyes, those same eyes from the photo, looked out at the trees but didn't seem to see them. Ava, Maddie said gently. The woman turned, startled. But when her eyes settled on Maddie's badge, something behind them shifted. You're not here for meds, she said. No, I'm here because a baby was found. Ava didn't blink. Her fingers froze, her voice cracked. In the river? Maddie nodded. Ava rose slowly from a chair, stepping forward like she'd just woken from a 6-year coma. Was it a boy? Yes. Tears flooded her eyes, but she didn't cry. Not yet. They told me I made him up. Ava whispered. Said there was no heartbeat. But I heard him cry. I swear I did. They told me I was sick. Put me in here and said I'd imagined everything. You didn't. I begged them to let me hold him. Just once. They said he'd been cremated already. I screamed for days. They sedated me. When I woke up, they said it never happened. Maddie handed her a photograph, the only one they had of the infant, taken in the hospital after the river rescue. Ava took it like it might crumble in her hands. She gasped, then collapsed into the chair, holding the picture like it was made of breath itself. That's him, she whispered. That's my son. Driving back, Maddie kept glancing at the rearview mirror. Scout lay curled in the back seat, but his eyes stayed open, watching, processing. She pulled off into a quiet turnout and stopped the engine. Scout, she said softly. What happened 6 years ago? Were you there? He sat up slowly, stared at her. It was a ridiculous question, and yet... Maddie reached into her satchel and pulled out the baby blanket again. Scout's ears lifted. Then he leaned forward and nosed the corner with deliberate care. You smelled that before, didn't you? He looked at her again, and in that moment, she didn't see a dog. She saw a witness. Scout had served under the same K-9 program Briggs once supervised. Maybe even during the same time Ava Monroe gave birth. Maybe he had been near that hospital. Maybe the scent never left him. That would explain the reaction. That would explain everything. Back at the station, Maddie pulled the incident map back out and pinned the riverbank, the hospital, and Pine Bridge. They formed a tight triangle. She flipped open Colton Briggs' personnel file, the last assignment he had before retirement, oversight of security at St. Vincent's maternity ward. Scout paced behind her, then stopped, and growled, just once. But that was enough. The air shifted the moment Colton Briggs walked into the precinct. Maddie had seen it before, how certain men, once in power, carried a kind of gravity that drew attention even when they no longer held a badge. Retired or not, Briggs still had that aura. Square jaw, silver hair clipped close. Department-issued fleece with his name stitched in gold thread, even though he hadn't worn the uniform in years. But Scout didn't care about old rank. The Malinois stood beside Maddie in the hallway, calm but alert, his tail still, his eyes following the man who'd just stepped out of the captain's office. Then something happened. Scout took one slow step backward, then another. Then he growled. Low, deep, intentional. Briggs stopped mid-stride. Well, look who's still on the force, he said, forcing a smile as he looked down at the dog. Didn't think they still let the old ones roam the halls. Maddie placed a hand lightly on Scout's harness. She felt the tension vibrating beneath his coat. Not fear, not agitation, something colder. Recognition. "Scout's still sharp," she said. "He doesn't forget." Briggs chuckled. "Dogs remember bacon and tennis balls. They don't remember people. He's not just any dog." Briggs looked up at her, amused. "That right?" She didn't blink. "Where were you stationed in October of 2017? His smile faded a fraction. "I was in hospital security." "St. Vincent's. Why?" Scout growled again, louder this time. A few heads turned. Maddie tightened her grip. Briggs stepped back instinctively, then caught himself. He straightened, smoothing down the front of his jacket. "If your dog's got a problem, maybe he needs to be retrained." "Funny," Maddie said, her tone even, because he usually only reacts that way to two things: fear and guilt. Briggs gave a short, mirthless laugh. "You're reading too much into a bark, Lieutenant." "He hasn't barked once." "He's growling." She watched his face shift, just slightly. "Enough." Scout stepped forward once, ears high, eyes narrowed. Briggs excused himself and walked off without another word. Only when the hallway door clicked shut did Scout lower his head. Maddie knelt beside him. "You knew him, didn't you?" From before, Scout didn't move, but his body had stopped trembling, as if a weight had landed and settled. That night, Maddie pulled up Scout's old deployment records. His service file, much of it redacted, had one detail she hadn't noticed before. Scout had been assigned to a joint program between the Grey Ridge PD and private hospital security for a 6-month rotation in 2017. The location? St. Vincent's maternity wing, exactly the same time Ava Monroe gave birth. The next morning, Maddie found an old photo buried in the department's public relations archives, a ribbon-cutting ceremony for a K9+ hospital security partnership. In the frame, a younger Scout sitting obediently next to a patrol car. Behind him stood Colton Briggs, hand on the dog's leash, grinning for the mayor's camera. Scout had been Briggs's assigned K9, and Briggs knew it. Maddie stood by the holding yard behind the precinct, watching Scout pace the training mats. She tossed a scent ball, the one laced with traces of the blanket that wrapped the infant from the river. Scout lunged, retrieved, sat. She held up a photo of Briggs. "Where did he take you, huh?" she whispered. Scout didn't bark, but his body language changed. He turned away from the ball and began walking a pattern. A deliberate loop, from the far gate to the kennels. Then a sharp turn. Maddie followed the movement. He was retracing steps. Memory for Scout wasn't made of dates or dialogue. It was made of scents, roots, chemicals in sweat, the tempo of footsteps, the way fear tasted in a man's clothes. And Scout was remembering all of it. Later, Maddie sat with Captain Leland in his office, the blinds drawn. "I think Briggs was involved," she said flatly. Leland exhaled. "You're accusing a decorated former lieutenant of stealing a child and faking a death certificate?" "I'm saying Scout recognized him." "I'm saying Briggs was there the night Ava Monroe's child was supposedly stillborn, and now we have that same child pulled from a river 6 years later. Do you have evidence? Not yet. But I've got a witness." Leland arched an eyebrow. She pointed to the floor. "He just doesn't speak English." Scout lay by her feet, calm now, waiting. As Maddie walked to her car that evening, Scout stopped at the passenger side and didn't jump in. Instead, he stood facing the street, ears forward, eyes locked on the road. Maddie followed his line of sight. A silver SUV pulled slowly out of a parking lot across the street. Its tinted windows caught the last rays of sunlight. She couldn't see the driver's face, but she knew. Scout growled, low and steady, as the vehicle disappeared into the night. Maddie sat in the corner of the dimmed pediatric ward, one eye on the sleeping infant in the bassinet, the other on the plastic vial in her palm. Inside, sealed tight, was a tiny cotton swab she'd used to dab the inside of the baby's cheek. Innocuous. Legal. Just barely. But if she was right, it could blow open a conspiracy that had festered for years, one hidden in plain sight. Scout lay at her feet, chin resting on his paws, eyes half closed. But he wasn't asleep. Not really. His ears flicked every time someone passed outside the room. Ever since Briggs had walked through the precinct doors, Scout hadn't fully relaxed. Neither had Maddie. She slipped the vial into a padded envelope and sealed it shut. Written on the front, Logan Barrett, private genomic research consultant. Not a lab tech, not an official forensics center. Someone she trusted more than the department's chain of command. It would take a day to get results. But she already had a feeling what they'd say. By late afternoon, Maddie sat in her truck in a grocery store parking lot, laptop balanced. On her knees, coffee going cold in the cup holder. Logan's video call came through exactly on schedule. "You sure you want to see this on a screen?" he asked. "Just tell me." I triple-checked. Compared the mitochondrial DNA from the baby to the archived blood draw from Ava Monroe's labor file, which, by the way, was tucked in an unindexed folder buried so deep it practically screamed cover-up, and it's a full maternal match. Maddie swallowed hard. "You're looking at a 99.99% certainty. The baby you pulled from the river is Ava Monroe's son." "Which is impossible." "Right," Logan said, "because according to every legal document filed by St. Vincent's, that child was declared stillborn at 3:11 a.m. on October 8, 2017. Cause of death? Complications during delivery. Same line in every chart, same format. But there's a problem." "What?" "The death certificate. Not signed by any attending physician. The digital signature is from someone named Colton Briggs. And that guy wasn't a doctor. He was head of security." Maddie felt the words slam into her chest. "How does a head of security get the authority to sign off on a child's death?" "He doesn't." That's the point silence stretched between them. "This wasn't a clerical error," Logan added. "This was deliberate. Someone wanted that child to disappear." Maddie clicked the call off and stared at the windshield for a long moment. Scout sat up in the back seat, watching her through the reflection. Their eyes met. No words needed. He knew. That night she couldn't sleep. The baby, now called Baby Doe in the temporary reports, had been transferred to a foster care safe unit under quiet protection. Maddie had requested it be kept low profile. No names, no flags in the system. Just in case. She sat at her kitchen table, Scout beside her, and reviewed every piece of evidence again. The backpack, the blanket, Ava's intake records, her psychiatric evaluation, the digital signature from Briggs. The baby wasn't just proof that Ava had told the truth. He was proof someone inside the hospital had buried a child who never died. Maddie's phone buzzed. A restricted number. She let it ring once, twice, picked up on the third. A voice, rough, older, male. "You need to stop digging, Lieutenant." She didn't say anything. "You think you're helping that kid, but you're walking into something bigger than you. Who is this? Let it go. Walk away, while you still can." The line went dead. Maddie stared at the screen. Scout stood, walked over, and placed a paw on her knee. A soft growl followed. Not loud, but it vibrated through her bones. "We're not walking away," she whispered. Scout didn't blink. The next morning, Maddie returned to the precinct early. Before the coffee was hot, before anyone else had turned on their screens, she printed out the death certificate, highlighted the signature. Then she pulled the duty roster from that night 6 years ago. Security logs, shift reports. Briggs had been on the floor for 7 hours that night. He was the only one who had access to both security footage and patient records. And after Ava was transferred, Briggs was promoted, quietly, then retired 2 years later with full benefits and a spotless record. Scout lay under her desk, tail flicking like a metronome. "You were there," she murmured. "You saw the cracks. You never forgot." She opened a blank case file, titled it Monroe Incident Reinvestigation. As the printer spat out documents, Scout stood and walked to the window, watching the parking lot. A silver SUV was idling across the street again. Same one as before. Maddie reached for her sidearm and clicked the safety off. The game wasn't secret anymore, and neither was the truth. The call came just after dusk. Maddie was brushing Scout's coat in the backyard, her hands moving slow and steady over his wiry fur. The sky had that dim blue tinge Montana gets in October, and the wind carried the dry scent of pine and harvest dust. Scout was calm. For once, but Maddie wasn't. Her phone buzzed on the porch railing. Unknown number, local area code. She answered with caution. "Lieutenant Holt." A voice cracked through the speaker, female, older, worn down but urgent. "You're the one asking questions about Ava Monroe, aren't you?" Maddie stood upright, her grip tightening. "Who is this?" "My name's Jean Ellis. I used to be a nurse at St. Vincent's, maternity wing." Retired now, Maddie walked toward the porch, lowering her voice. "What do you know?" A pause. Then, "I know that baby didn't die." 10 minutes later, Maddie was in her car, Scout already curled in the back seat, eyes alert again. The address led her to a modest yellow house near the edge of town, porch light flickering, wind chimes rattling like bones. Jean Ellis stood in the doorway. Tall, thin, wrapped in an old cardigan that looked hand-knit and threadbare. Her hands trembled when she opened the screen door. "Come in." But I don't have long. Maddie stepped inside. The living room smelled of camphor and books. Photos lined the walls, most of them faded, decades old. Scout walked just far enough in to sit by the door, keeping his eyes on Jean the whole time. Jean noticed. "He doesn't miss a thing, does he?" "Not once." Maddie said, "You said you know the baby didn't die." Jean nodded and sat down in a creaky armchair. "I was working the night Ava Monroe gave birth. I was there. She was in labor for hours. No complications I could see. Healthy vitals. That baby cried, clear as day, 5 minutes after delivery." "But the records, fabricated," Jean said sharply. "About 3 hours after the delivery, a man from admin came down. Not medical, not even hospital staff. He gave me a sealed envelope with orders said the baby was being transferred under a private custody request, that I wasn't to update any files. Just note the child as deceased." Stillbirth Maddie's stomach turned. "And you did it?" I argued. "Of course I did. But then the head of security came in, Briggs, and told me if I didn't sign off, I'd be liable for breaking confidentiality and interfering with a federal placement order. They used words I didn't even understand. And then I signed. I marked the baby as dead. The next morning, my shift assignment was changed. A week later, I was restructured into records. 6 months after that, I retired early. Scout let out a quiet whine. Not loud, not confused, more like confirmation. "You ever wonder where the baby went?" Maddie asked. Jean looked her in the eyes. "Every day." Back in her car, Maddie stared out at the night. Jean had given her one more thing. A name. Hope for Families Foundation, a so-called charity that claimed to help place children from unfit homes into loving environments. The name hadn't come up in any of Maddie's prior searches, but John insisted whenever a mother in distress came into the hospital without support or insurance, someone from that organization always seemed to show up. Quiet, polite, but always with paperwork. Scout pawed at the window. Maddie pulled up the charity's filing records. The foundation was headquartered in Idaho, but its incorporation agent listed in Montana. The name, L.C. Briggs, Colton's older brother, a retired attorney. The foundation had been flagged once, 3 years prior, for failing to report transfer documents for 2 special needs adoptions. Both infants were born at St. Vincent's. One of them matched the birth date of a child Maddie had already traced in the database, flagged as deceased due to neural tube defects. Only that child had never seen an autopsy, never had a burial record, and had a file signed by the same person every time. Briggs, at 2 a.m., Maddie sat in her kitchen again, Scout at her feet, her laptop open with a folder labeled Possible Network Baby Transfers. 9 names. 9 infants declared dead at birth over a 6-year period. All had parents who either had psychiatric flags, lacked support systems, or were under stress during labor. All had death certificates signed off under unusual circumstances. None had coroner records. Scout shifted. He rested his head on her knee, but his eyes remained wide open, fixed on the shadows outside the sliding glass door. Maddie didn't need a court order to know what she was seeing. This wasn't an isolated mistake. It was a pattern, a system, a quiet farm of babies taken under legal disguise and sold under the mask of charity. Maddie stared at the screen and whispered, "How many?" Scout didn't move, but his ears twitched, like he knew. And maybe he did. The river looked calm that morning, deceptively calm, as if it didn't remember swallowing a newborn in silence 6 years ago. But Scout remembered. Maddie stood at the edge of the tree line, her boots crunching lightly over frost-laced roots. The breeze rolled in off the water, stirring the yellowed grasses along the bank. She adjusted the wire in her jacket collar, checking the mic feed. "Surveillance team in position," came the voice through her earpiece. "We have eyes." Scout waited quietly by her side, tail low, ears forward, muscles coiled but controlled. The same place where he had found the backpack, the same roots, the same river bend. Now it was bait. She checked her phone. One new message from Colton Briggs. "On my way, don't move." Maddie tucked the phone back in her pocket and exhaled slowly. "Showtime," she whispered to Scout. The dog didn't look at her. He was already watching the trail behind them. 10 minutes passed, then footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Colton emerged from the trees, hands in his coat pockets, expression unreadable. No smile this time, no badge to hide behind. Just a man who had stayed in the shadows too long. "You said you found something new," he said. "I did," Maddie replied, stepping back towards the river's edge. "A second backpack. Same make, same smell, same stitch pattern. You bring me out here for a bag?" "No," she said. "I brought you here for the truth." Colton took one more step, close enough now that Maddie could see the tension in his jaw. "You're making a mess you don't understand." "I understand plenty." Jean Ellis told me what happened. Logan verified the DNA. And I know about Hope for Families. I know your brother set up the legal shell. I know you falsified death records. The real question is, how many more babies did you traffic under charity paperwork? Colton's face twitched. Then he moved. It wasn't sudden. Not violent. Just a quiet, slow pivot as he took a step closer to Maddie. Too close now. The riverbank at her back. His shoes just inches from the edge. Scout's body rose behind her, a low growl vibrating through the air. "You have no proof," Colton said, voice tightening. "You have stories." Hunches. A retired nurse and a barking dog. Maddie didn't flinch. "That barking dog found your lie under a tree." Colton's eyes flicked to Scout. That dog was mine once. Should have put him down when I had the chance. Maddie stepped backward, her heel grazing loose earth. Colton lunged. His hand slammed into her shoulder, trying to shove her backward into the river, but he never got the chance to finish the motion. Scout launched. The Malinois' body hit Briggs mid-torso with brutal precision, teeth bared, jaws clamping hard onto the fabric of his jacket and dragging him down into the dirt. Briggs howled, twisting as Scout pinned him, one paw across the man's chest, the other anchoring to the soil. Before Briggs could fight back, 4 officers emerged from the tree line, weapons raised. "Get your hands where we can see them!" Scout stayed on him until Maddie called his name. The dog backed off, panting, eyes locked on Briggs. The former lieutenant lay sprawled against the bank, hand cut, face pale. Maddie knelt down beside him. "You almost got away with it." Colton looked up at her. "You think this ends with me? You have no idea how far it goes. We'll find out." Maddie said. He laughed bitterly. "They'll bury it like they always do." "Not this time." She stood, looked toward Scout and nodded. He padded toward her, blood on his muzzle, breath steady. "Good boy," she whispered. As they walked back up the trail, Maddie felt the tension release from her shoulders for the first time in weeks. Scout trotted slightly ahead, nose low to the ground, leading the way not as a dog on patrol, but as a partner, one who had never forgotten what others tried to hide. The sun broke through the trees. The river rolled on. But this time, it didn't carry secrets. It carried truth. The gates of Pinebridge Recovery Center creaked open just after sunrise. Frost still clung to the chain link, and the scent of pine sap hung thick in the morning air. Maddie stepped out of the SUV with the infant in her arms, bundled tightly against the chill. His tiny hand peeked out from the blanket, and wrapped around his wrist was a faded hospital ID bracelet, one no one had thought to remove. Scout followed closely behind, calm but vigilant. He'd been oddly gentle with the child since the rescue. No sniffing, no tail wagging. Just quiet, focused presence, like he knew something delicate was unfolding and didn't want to break it. The staff at Pinebridge led them down a quiet corridor lined with old photos and soft yellow paint that tried too hard to feel warm. Room 214 sat at the far end. Ava Monroe had been housed there for nearly 6 years. 6 years of silence, confusion, and being told the child she felt kick beneath her ribs had never taken a breath. Maddie nodded to the nurse, who opened the door with a soft knock. Ava sat in the corner chair, knitting, like always. Her hair was longer now, streaked with grey. Her eyes flicked up at the sound of the door, and then widened as they fell on Maddie. And then, the baby. No one spoke. Ava stood slowly, as if afraid she might shatter the vision. Her hands trembled, her knees buckled, just slightly. Maddie stepped forward and gently unwrapped the blanket, revealing the baby's face and the hospital bracelet. Ava's eyes locked on it. St. Vincent's. Dobb, October 8th, 2017. Monroe, male infant, she gasped. A sound that wasn't just breath. It was the sound of 6 years of pain breaking open all at once. She reached out but stopped inches away, afraid she might wake up. Is this a trick?" she whispered, voice raw. "They said he was dead." Maddie shook her head. "He wasn't. They lied. But he's here now. And he's safe." Ava collapsed to her, knees covering her mouth, tears pouring silently down her cheeks. Maddie crouched with her, the baby still in her arms. Scout moved to their side, placing himself between them and the door like a sentinel. "I knew it," Ava sobbed. "I knew I wasn't crazy." I heard him cry. "You weren't crazy," Maddie said softly. "You were right." They stole him. They tried to erase him. But Scout didn't forget. And now the truth is out, Ava finally let her hands touch the infant's cheek, light as a feather. The boy blinked sleepily and reached out, gripping her finger like it was something he'd been waiting for all his life. A sound left Ava's mouth, half laugh, half sob. His name. I gave him a name before they took him. What was it? Maddie asked. Caleb. Maddie smiled. Then that's his name. The director of Pine Bridge stood outside the door, speaking in hushed tones with a county official. Legal paperwork was already being prepared. Ava's case had shifted overnight from unstable delusional to wrongfully institutionalized. The evidence Maddie provided, Briggs' forged paperwork, the DNA match, the statements from Jean Ellis, had rewritten everything. Inside the room, Ava held her son like a lifeline. Maddie watched them from the corner, her heart both full and broken. Scout lay beside the chair, his head on his paws, but his eyes never left Ava and Caleb. You remember her, don't you? Maddie whispered to him. You were there. You watched it happen. Scout didn't respond, but a quiet sigh left him, long and slow, as if a burden had finally lifted. Ava looked up at Maddie. Will they take him again? No, Maddie said firmly. Not this time. The system failed you, but we won't let it happen again. Ava cradled Caleb closer. I don't know how to be a mom anymore. You already are, Maddie said. You never stopped. As they walked back to the SUV later, Scout paused at the edge of the sidewalk. He turned his head, looking back at the recovery center, and gave a soft, short bark. Maddie looked down at him. Yeah, she murmured. You did good, partner. Scout gave no sign of pride or victory. He simply stepped back into the vehicle, curled beside Caleb's car seat, and closed his eyes. Not to rest, but to guard. The past had screamed. The river had whispered. But Scout had remembered. And today that memory had saved a mother's soul. The press called it the River Baby case. But inside the department, no one said the name without glancing at Scout first. The fallout from Briggs's arrest rippled fast and wide. The files Maddie uncovered, initially thought to be isolated, turned out to be the front page of a book no one wanted written. With the help of forensic auditors and off-the-record interviews with retired hospital staff, a disturbing pattern emerged. 13 infants, all declared stillborn or medically deceased over a span of 8 years. None of them had burial certificates, none had coroner's signatures, all had paperwork funneled through Hope for Families Foundation, and all of them shared one common signature, L.C. Briggs. It didn't stop there. A subpoena to the Foundation's financials revealed a trail of money leading through shell accounts and dummy foster agencies. At least 6 of the children had been placed in private adoptions, many of them out of state, some allegedly overseas. The entire operation was propped up by a carefully structured facade of legitimacy, court-approved transfers, rubber-stamped guardianship papers, and networked connections with local judges and hospital boards. No one had ever dug deep enough until a dog refused to stop growling at the wrong man. Maddie stood at the front of the briefing room as the final case findings were presented. FBI agents had flown in. DOJ observers sat in silence. At the center of the digital evidence board was a map peppered with red pins, each one a stolen child. Scout lay at her feet, not asleep, watching, always watching. We were wrong, Maddie said into the mic, voice steady. We trusted the wrong systems, and it took a dog's nose to show us what we missed. No one laughed. At the back of the room, Captain Leland nodded slowly. He'd offered her a transfer the week prior, a promotion to regional investigations. Larger budget. Fewer night shifts. Desk work. She declined it. I need to stay where I can listen, she had told him, to the ones who don't have a voice. Leland didn't argue. He just scratched Scout behind the ears and said, "Then you'd better stay close to this one." 2 weeks later, Maddie stood at the small ceremony held in the K9 unit's courtyard. She was in uniform, not dress blues. Scout sat beside her, flanked by a new leash, a new vest, and a plaque etched with gold letters. "For service beyond silence, Scout, K9 Unit 23. He remembered what we forgot. Reporters asked for interviews. News anchors offered national airtime. She declined all of them. This case was never about headlines. It was about ghosts. Ghosts of children no one had looked for. Of mothers like Ava, locked away for speaking a truth no one wanted to hear. And it was about the one soul who refused to let the truth stay buried beneath roots and river mud. Scout back in her office, Maddie opened a manila folder marked Pending Inquiry. Inside were the names of 2 more children flagged in a neighboring state. Similar paperwork, similar patterns, both from hospitals with ties to the foundation. "Ready for one more?" she asked without turning around. Scout padded forward and rested his chin on her lap. Outside, the wind rustled through the pine trees. Somewhere, another file waited to be opened. Another name waited to be cleared. And Scout would listen. Not for orders, not for praise, but for the faint, buried echoes of truth waiting to be found again. The courtroom was silent as the judge leaned into the mic and cleared his throat. In consideration of newly presented DNA evidence, institutional mismanagement, and unlawful suppression of birth records, he said, voice steady, "The court hereby restores full parental rights to Miss Ava Monroe. The child, formerly identified as Baby Doe, shall be legally renamed." At the mother's request, Ava sat frozen in the front row, her hands trembling on the arms of the chair. The boy, Caleb, now squirmed on her lap, distracted by the shiny badge pinned to Maddie's chest nearby. He reached for it with a delighted squeal, and Ava let out the smallest, most fragile laugh Maddie had ever heard. She hadn't cried in court. She didn't need to. She had already done all her crying in silence, over 6 long years of not being believed. Scout sat at Maddie's feet in full department vest, the only one in the room not distracted by the news cameras flashing in the hallway beyond. His eyes never left the boy. It wasn't just protection. It was something deeper, something more ancient. Recognition. The court clerk stood and asked for the child's full legal name. Ava took the mic. "Hope," she said softly. "His name is Hope." The case closed headlines were everywhere within 24 hours. Former hospital officials were indicted. The Hope for Families Foundation dissolved overnight. A multi-state task force began reopening dozens of cases tied to unusual birth and death record discrepancies. But it wasn't the judges or politicians or lawyers who became the face of justice. It was Scout. A local artist painted a mural just outside the precinct. It showed a lone K9, muddy paws planted at a riverbank, staring into the shadows. Above the image were 4 simple words: "He never let go." The department offered Maddie a position with state investigations again. High profile, higher salary. She turned it down once more. "I already work for the only one who hears what matters," she said, patting Scout's shoulder. She stayed in the K9 unit, training new handlers and dogs, teaching them what textbooks didn't, how to listen for more than commands, how to trust a dog when the facts didn't line up. Because sometimes the dog was the only one who remembered. 3 months later, Ava and Hope visited the precinct for the first time since the custody ruling. Hope was walking now, a little unsteady but determined. Scout approached slowly, then sat beside the child, nudging his small shoulder with his snout. Hope turned, wrapped his arms around the dog's neck without hesitation. Ava knelt beside them, brushing her son's hair from his face. "I don't know if he knows," she whispered. Maddie smiled. "He does." So does Scout that evening. Maddie drove Scout out to the riverside clearing, the place where it had all started. The trees were bare now. The air smelled like cold water and pine sap. The root system that had tangled around the backpack had eroded away, washed clean by autumn rain. She let Scout out of the truck. He didn't run. He walked, slowly, intentionally, toward the same boulder where he'd first alerted her that something was wrong. He climbed up, turned once in a circle, then sat. Maddie stayed back, watching from the edge of the clearing. Scout sat quietly, facing the river, ears relaxed, body still, not standing guard, not searching, just remembering. The water moved past, steady and slow, carrying away the last weight of what had been buried. And beside it sat the one who never let go of the scent that didn't belong, the one who refused to ignore a mother's cry in silence, the one who changed everything just by refusing to forget. Maddie stepped forward and sat beside him. "You found the truth," she whispered, "before any of us even thought to look." Scout didn't turn his head. He didn't need to. The wind picked up. The river rolled on. And for the first time since that morning 6 years ago, the silence no longer felt like a cover-up. It felt like peace,